Hello, and welcome back to Beer and Philosophy. Cheers. So I want to talk a little bit about where I sit at the moment on the sort of political spectrum. Oh joy, politics, right? We can talk later about my views on politics in general. Suffice to say that until relatively recently, relatively late in my life, I did not engage in politics. And, well, now I do, to whatever little degree, largely from this sort of philosophical angle. So where do I sit? Well, when I've done these tools online, you can take these little surveys and they kind of place you on various spectrums. Usually that goes kind of politically left and right. And then also they usually do like authoritarian and libertarian. And I think, historically, when I've taken those kinds of surveys, I've wound up right on the leftmost edge, and but right in the middle in terms of authoritarian versus libertarian. So historically, that's kind of where I sat, I suppose, politically. Now, obviously there's going to be bias involved in the test. I've had some people, when I posted these results online, people are like, oh, well, that test is biased. If you took this other one, you'd probably end up more in the center. So, I don't know. I have a few more thoughts on that in a minute I'll tell you about. More recently, when I've taken some of these surveys, it turns out, I've drifted just, from being on the extreme leftmost edge, I've drifted just a teensy little bit. So now I'm just like 98% left or whatever. However, there's been a dramatic shift towards being more libertarian, I guess, for whatever kind of definition they're using in these online quizzes. So take that however you may. But apparently I now occupy the lower left quadrant of these political compass kinds of things. So back to the idea of fitting on a spectrum, and some people have sort of been like, oh, well, you'd actually be more in the center, giving your views. Well, I don't know about that. I'm not sure. As we'll see as we explore a few other of my beliefs on certain topics, I feel comfortable saying I fit fairly firmly on the left end of the political spectrum. Sadly, I feel this urge to kind of add this caveat that it's like, oh, but I'm not one of those go crazy people, right? I feel like, we shouldn't have to add these kind of caveats, and yet, perhaps it's necessary in this, day and age, where there seems to be this extreme polarization of people, unfortunately. So what do I want to say with that? So I think that there's a certain tendency for most of us. Well, this reminds me of another saying, and perhaps I'll get to this in the quotes and aphorisms segment at one point, but my grandmother used to own a mug that said, "Be reasonable, do it my way." Right? And so I think there's this tendency for most of us, nearly all of us, we have this bias toward viewing our own beliefs as reasonable, and those who disagree with us as being unreasonable. This is perhaps an example of the fundamental attribution error in social psychology. We can explore that as well in another episode. So from that perspective, it's reasonable that most people would view their beliefs as being kind of middle-ish. That they would view themselves, maybe within one standard deviation of the mean, right? So for myself, it's like, oh yeah, well, I lean to the left, okay, fine. But, how far? I guess that's a question, right? And so I believe that my beliefs are reasonable. And so there's a bias there. Now, some people do identify with the extremes, right? They'll be like, yes, I'm a leftist through and through, or they'll believe, agree with, the extreme right or whatever. So not everyone has that tendency, but I do believe most people do. How is that relevant? Well, I guess it's a little difficult to gauge one's own political position, perhaps. Hence why some of these tools can be helpful, but of course they're vulnerable to the biases of whomever created them. Anyway, so I think the bottom line is that I generally endorse beliefs aligned with the left end of the political spectrum, and I hasten to add, you should not therefore assume my beliefs on any particular issue, because, as some of those previous quotes say, I am large, I contain multitudes. And we'll get more into some of the details of what I believe as we go along, and hopefully we can start to have conversations along these lines, and I can further articulate some of my beliefs, and of course have my beliefs changed through conversation.